Hello, people. Andrew here, talking about comics from a reader, collector, speculator, investor point of view, in that order of importance to myself. Today, I am looking at the Books of Magic. It's a four-issue series released in 1990-91. It was written by Neil Gaiman and illustrated by four separate artists, each one taking on a book telling about the history of magic. So, really, what is it about? Its premise is that there's this young fellow by the name of Tim Hunter, a 12-year-old boy who's apparently going to be like the greatest sorcerer the world has ever known, or magician, provided he wants to follow the path of magic. He can say, no, I don't want to do that, and I'll just be a normal kid and then grow up and have a normal type of life, or I can embrace the magic that's within me, that's sort of my destiny, if that's what I choose to do. To get there, and this is decided by a fellow by the name of the Phantom Stranger, who we've met before in the DC universe. He collects a group of mages together that eventually become known as the Trenchcoat Brigade. There's himself, there's John Constantine, Dr. Occult, and Mr. E. And the idea is that they are going to take this kid, Tim Hunter, on this magical journey to learn about magic in the DC universe. And I think that's the main purpose of this whole book. It wasn't so much to introduce Tim Hunter as a potential magical being in the universe, it was more so, let's do a tour of the magic in the DC universe for those that are unfamiliar with it, or just to bring it all together. And so Neil Gaiman was called in to write the script for this four-issue series. So it is that journey, and the first part of the journey is this in book one, which talks about the history of magic. Now, none of this is based on history, although this is the closest book that we get to that, because there are books written about the history of magic, where it came from, how it developed over the years, all the way back to, cavemen. Anytime that somebody in the past didn't understand how something worked, a natural phenomena, then they would, say that it's magic. This is where we get a lot of our mythology, a lot of the gods and stuff. And why does the sun rise? Because the gods make it so. Why does it rain? Because the gods are crying. Well, all of this sort of stuff. And the gods are magical. So magic existed within our own history. And this sort of goes back to, the Phantom Stranger finds Tim Hunter and says, okay, we're going to go back through the past and look at the origins of magic and how it developed throughout the year. And to illustrate this one, John Bolton. I do like John Bolton's material. He's a very tends to have a realistic approach to his artwork, which fits in fine with this because, as I say, it does have elements of history, references events happening in our historical past. Here's an example of his work here. So, going back to the days of, I don't want any glare on here if I can help it. Of the past with the shamans and what have you, and they would do magical rites and things like that to help with the hunt or whatever it was, or explain various things. And John Bolton goes on. I mean, his style is varied, but it still keeps with that sort of realism, and he embraces some of the style of art of the time. And as you see, we can go back in history with the Egypt and then the Greece, etc., etc. So it is a look at the history of magic, our history of magic, as well as the history of magic in the DC universe. Tim Hunter comes back from that, and then in book two, joins up with John Constantine, and we learn about magic in the present. And this is where we get to meet with a number of various characters that are in the DC universe. There's a good back and forth between Tim Hunter and Boston Brand. Deadman, we get to meet Madame Xanadu and Zatanna. There's even a nod to Baron Winter from the Night Force. So we have all of the characters that are currently in the DC universe sort of being introduced to this potential protege, Tim Hunter. And this is illustrated by the Scott Hampton, who does paintings a bit more than I would say illustrations. And here, I'll give you an example of his work here. And I like all of these artists, by the way. And I think it was a good idea to differentiate each one of these with different art. So here you can see that he's running into the Spectre, another character from the DC universe that is part of this journey as well. And in this one, as in with the past one, there's always learning that magic has a cost, and the cost will be paid as time goes on. So there's nothing nothing comes for free. Interesting in this one, it also talks about how magic is somewhat as time has gone on, and has lost some of its luster in the real world. Is that devoted more time to science and explanations than the magical world. At one point, Tim Hunter is asked, do you believe in magic? And he says, I want to believe in magic, but it's very difficult in this world. And I feel, somewhat the same way. I would like to believe that there's magics and mysteries that we just can't explain that are part of this world, but there's nothing to really indicate that that's a truth. Although wanting to believe, that's part of it. So in the third book, it we go off of the planet to all of the realms, the mystical realms that are just adjacent, sometimes overlapping our world. So all of the mystical places of the fairykin, all of the different planes of reality that are rubbing up against our reality. And Charles Vess provides the illustrations for this journey through basically fairyland and the Feylands. And again, he was a great choice for this because I find he has a very whimsical and light touch to his illustrations, and it fits in. It has some of that old folklore, folklore sort of appeal to it. Illustrations that you might see in books of centuries ago when they illustrated various fantastical books. So he was a good choice for art for this particular one, and this is the book that I think is the strongest of the set, and part of that is because of Neil Gaiman. I mean, everything is very talky. There's not a lot of action happening in books 1 and 2, and there's a little bit more development of story and character and consequence in this particular book. But Neil Gaiman, I've read a number of his books. I haven't read all of his books, but every book that I've read, and including the Sandman series, he embraces that fantastical world. There's an element of magic and the fairylands and whatever in everything that I've read that he's written. So this is in his wheelhouse, and he explores that magic, and he knows this realm really well. So it gives it a great deal of character. And the characters that are introduced and some of the rules and some of the consequences, they all feel, organic. It feels like, yes, if this was Fairy Realm, I can believe all of these things would happen. It's also interesting that in this particular book, there's a crossover with the Sandman, Neil Gaiman's creation, and Cain and Abel from the Dream, from his particular land, because it again borders our land and sometimes overlaps. So, and then the fourth one, he's teamed up. Oh, that's with Dr. Occult, by the way. In the fourth one, he teams up with Mr. E, who seems to be a little bit off balance. He's a blinded sorcerer type fellow who can travel into the future, and he tends to try to see things in black and white as chaos and order. And he's got a mad hatred in some respects for Tim Hunter, and is actually considering killing him to avoid having this powerful mage. I mean, because part of what he shows him in the future, possible futures, is Tim Hunter being a reckless, horrible dictator, tyrant type of magician. And Tim Hunter says, that's not going to be me. And he says, oh yeah, could be you. Yeah, I think it could be you. And it unnerves Tim Hunter to a certain extent. He says, maybe I don't want to take this route, and maybe that's the case. So Dr. Occult continues to take him through the world to the end of the world, as a matter of fact, which is kind of interesting. This one is illustrated by Paul Johnson, and he does strange things with the panels, and he overlaps panels and he overlaps images. and sometimes he's has somewhat of an erratic style to his artwork. And again, this kind of fits in with the whole we're not sure what the future is going to look like, and it's all kind of scattered around here. An example of his stuff, and again, this is kind of interesting. He makes it to the end of the world, and he runs into Death from the Sandman series, as well as Destiny. Destiny's very happy at this point in time because he says, "Oh, we're finally at the end. I can shuffle off because there's no more destiny to be told." And Death is there saying, "Yes, well, now that we're at the end of time, I can finally turn off the lights and lock the door." So, of course, they don't all stay at the end of time, but it's interesting that we have Death and Destiny making an appearance here in this particular book. So he goes through this journey, makes it back to his own timeline as 12-year-old, and has to make the decision, do I want to continue my life of magic, knowing that there are consequences and there are prices to be paid? And I've gone through this journey, I've met people, I've seen what some of this stuff is like. Is it something that I want to do? So ultimately, spoilers here. The decision is, he says no, but on second thought, maybe yes. And there's a little bit of a hiccup there at the very end, but that's basically where we get to it by the end of the 4-issue series. So is it worth a read? Well, it's interesting in that, yes, it's worth a read. I find Neil Gaiman stuff is interesting to read, period. And he does a good job, and he likes magic, and he likes the magical realm. He gives very distinct character to all of the 4 guides. Tim Hunter is still being developed, but even he has some interesting moments. Some of the consequences, especially in that 3rd issue where they're actually in fairyland and making some decisions about what to do and where to go, and you get to see Baba Yaga, which is a lot of fun when she comes into the picture. I found that was the strongest book, and again, much into Neil Gaiman's wheelhouse of that sort of fairyland. And then I'm always hesitant about somebody goes to the end of time and goes through the future and tries to, examine what things are going to be like, because, kind of, in a lot of ways, it will date a book, because if they only go, this was written in 1991, this one here, or 90, if you jump 20, 30 years ahead in this particular book, is this the scene we're going to see? Because we're living it now. But he kind of avoids that by jumping in huge gaps all the way to the end of time, and doesn't spend much time in each one, just sort of showing what possibly could happen, and the effects of magic or lack of that happen throughout the course of time. So I really like the exploring the DC universe. I didn't know all of these characters, so it's interesting to run into them and meet them. And how the magic plays out in the DC universe. So I really like that. I really like Neil Gaiman's script, just period, on his sort of essay on magic, because that's somewhat what this is. It's not really a grand adventure story. There's not a ton of action happening in here, but there are some interesting elements in there as well. So, and then the artwork, I did like the fact that they broke it down to 4 different artists, sort of utilizing their styles and in the right era or whatever it was. John Bolton doing stuff that was related to the past and having a very grounded and almost realistic approach to his artwork. That of the present day by Scott Hem with paintings, and again a little bit more abstract, but I enjoyed his paintings, and I particularly like Charles Vess's material from the 3rd book. I thought that was the best combination, and I do like Charles Vess's material. And then finally with Paul Johnson doing the final one, which was kind of an interesting sort of take on this futuristic thing. So I really liked all 4 artists. I did like all 4 chapters. I liked the thing as a whole, and as an explanation of the DC Universe's magic, and also, just as I say, a general essay on magic as well. So yes, so it's worth the read. For collecting reasons, you got a Neil Gaiman story, you've got the various artists, if you like John Bolton or Charles Vessels, the ones that I think more people are in tune. The cameos by Dream and Cain and Abel in number 3, the cameo of Death and Destiny in the final one. You don't see those characters cross over too often with any other books. Plus all of the other magical characters, Dr. Fate, as I said, the Spectre, they show up throughout the book, so there's reasons to collect it just for their appearances as well. As far as spec or investment, it's not a book that you would necessarily find in a dollar bin unless it was a sort of a beat up copy. But it's not a high end book either. You could probably get issues 1 through 4 with neither one of these sort of standing out for anywhere from $5 to $15 a piece, and of course you can buy it collected as well. The first issue features the first appearance of Tim Hunter, but he never really became anything too spectacular in the DC universe. Now, the Books of Magic, and I will talk about this moving forward, did go on for a 75-issue series. There's a couple of other series at the end, and Tim Hunter is still pretty much active in the DC universe in the late 2020s or the mid 2020s. So he's still a character around, but just not as prominent as he might have been, or might have been suggested he was. There is a callback to say that this is very much like a Harry Potter type of story, because it takes a 12-year-old boy who's somewhat normal and then discovers that he's got all of this magical ability. And this was written about 7 years before Harry Potter. But that sort of concept is not enough for a lawsuit, because it's just sort of a general idea of what could possibly happen, and it's in the telling of the story. And I think Tim Hunter is very, very different than Harry Potter. So, nothing to spec or investment on, a number of things to collect, but definitely worth the read. That's what I got to say about Books of Magic, at least this opening quartet, and then we'll look at the follow-up series later. In the meantime, I would ask you to be good to yourself and be good to others. And we'll talk again soon.